Our next guest is Leonard Khafafa. Leonard is a communications consultant. He's an aviation commentator. He's a regular columnist on The Standard. There's an article that you've written, and it's been published in today's paper, isn't it, Leonard? There's something here. What are you talking about today?
Being in the zone, essentially. There comes a time when even the most, how do I put it? Even the most ordinary athlete gets into the zone and beats even more established athletes. So my article is about getting into the zone. And as a country, I feel we are now getting into the zone because we are becoming continental leaders. We are taking leadership of the continent, setting the tone for conversations on the continent, evidenced by the just concluded climate summit, where Kenya played a lead role.
Right. Yeah, I see actually the headline here is Ruto has clearly become Africa's de facto leader. Made him king.
Well, he's made himself king. He's elevated himself on the continental stage, and there we have it.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
You like tea as well, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm a tea person.
Chai na
I'm
maziwa.
the quintessential Kenyan.
You're the Kenyan.
Kabisa.
Chai na maziwa.
Chai na maziwa.
Na maziwa mingi.
Kabisa.
Not a tea, that thing of a tea.
A
drop of cream.
Ile.
Hata si drop, ni kama maziwa ilikuwa natembelea kwa mbali. Maji ndio nyingi.
No, chai ni lazima iwe maziwa.
Kabisa.
Yeah. Siti, why don't you welcome Leonard with the day's proverb?
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week are from the country of Sierra Leone. To try and fail is not laziness.
To try and fail is not laziness.
It's not laziness.
Try and fail, not laziness.
No, it isn't.
Leonard, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
Well, somebody has to put in effort. I mean, you'd rather put in effort towards some task than not do it at all. Not doing at all is now the definition of laziness going by that proverb. So you have to try. You have to do something.
So it's like the Wahenga of Sierra Leone were trying to discourage just lazy laggards from their community.
Absolutely. Well, Africa never had time for laggards. The Africa of old never had time for laggards. We woke up working, went to sleep tired after a full day's work.
It's a hamster's life. Just constantly like...
Yes and no. Yes and no. It was orderly because there was a time for everything. You knew when to go to work. You knew when to take time off. You knew when to relax. All these you knew. But you couldn't go throughout the day without working. You were going to work, whether you liked it or not.
You had to do something.
You were going to do something. And the roles were assigned. You knew. As a small child, your job, very small, very young, you look after goat and sheep. You're slightly older, you look after the calves. When you're older, you look after the cows. Like that. There was always that process. Even when it comes to tilling the land, you're a certain age, you'll be given a small portion of land to twiddle around with. And so forth and so forth. I mean, these rules were clear.
Right.
Yes.
I agree with that.
Inculcating the culture of working.
Yes.
And hard work.
Yes.
Try and fail, you're okay. You are not lazy.
That's the process of actually learning.
That's the process
trying
of learning.
And hopefully failing, because it is argued that failure teaches you a far more profound lesson than actually success.
Right. Leonard, are you a pilot?
I'm not a pilot.
You commented a lot about, the aviation industry and all. I mean, why the interest? Did you want to be a pilot when I grow up, I want to be a pilot?
Just like every other little boy here who is fascinated by machines. I was fascinated by planes from childhood. And it so happened that in the course of what I did, I traveled quite a lot. I've racked quite a number of, a few million air miles over the past 25 years, traveling around the world. And I now consider myself something of an aviation commentator.
Why?
Interest. I mean, you're in these machines, you have to look around and see how they work, get to know about them, talk to people who are involved in running them. And then at some point or the other, you begin to talk to the management of some of these organizations that put these machines in the air. But coming closer home, I mean, Kenya Airways is one of our iconic institutions. And it behooves us as Kenyans to be interested in it, to take pride in what it is, and to interrogate issues that affect it. Including performance, past and present, see where we've gone off the rails, and see what we can do to bring it back on track.
This has been a conversation across for many years, Kenya Airways, you know, from the good old days to the turbulent times to now, where recently the company announced that, you know, we have reported an operating profit.
Right.
But we're still getting a net loss, you know, what's happening. And of course, the entire conversation was, all right, so is it a profit, is it a loss? Are you guys just telling us things? Are you heading back to profitability? Do you still want taxpayers to put more money into this thing? Why must we do that? When you look at the performance of this airline over the last, say, 20 years or so, where are we at now? If you were to do a curve, are we still heading down south?
I think we're in a good place now, finally. For the first time in over 6 years, we can say this light at the end of the tunnel. And the operating profit that was recently announced is evidence of that. KQ, let me give you a bit of history. KQ did very well at some point in time, about 10, 12, 13 years ago. And the management then decided to expand the airline, to grow it. Because in aviation, big is always beautiful. When you have a big airline, obviously economies of scale, benefits accrue to you, and a lot of other, you're rich, your network is expanded, your reach is more, you have more footprint all over the world, and that translates to revenues, good revenues and good performance. So the expansion then, the Project Mawingu, as it was called, was a good thing. But it ran into headwinds.
Mawingu ran into headwinds.
Yes.
That's right.
So there were many factors that sort of collided and put a spanner in the works. Some of them, the fault of a poor decisional process. Others, just outright bad luck. When I talk about bad luck, we're talking about things like the fact that KQ was supposed to be the launch pad for the Dreamliner in Africa, and for some reason there was a delay, and the Dreamliners came in much, much later than anticipated. I think close to 2 or 3 years late, and they were instrumental in the expansion drive. You know, they were a necessary cog in that expansion drive. And then we had other things like the Westgate terror attack that decimated the market share that we had from Europe. We had things like the fire that burnt the arrivals terminal at Jomo Kenyatta. I think that affected even our bid to get Category 1 status, which would have enabled us to fly into the US at that time. We had things like the Ebola virus in West Africa. At that time, then, West Africa was a very significant cog in our network. And when we stopped flying to West Africa because of Ebola, it affected the KQ's profitability. So there were other things, of course, things occasioned by human error, like the fact that KQ got its instruments, some of its instruments wrong. The instruments behind fuel hedging and foreign exchange hedging. They got those ones horrendously wrong, and it led to the decline of KQ.
When you say we got it wrong,
yeah.
How do you get such things wrong? Because I would assume that if an airline has been in existence for as long as we have, you have people who understand this hedging. And yes, you can stray, but it appears we didn't stray. We took permanent residence.
Let me talk about Forex fluctuations. Let me talk about the global price of crude oil, because those are the things that we hedged against. Those are really unpredictable variables. You can't really predict. I mean, at some point you think you know it, and then they sort of throw you a curveball, and you go totally off track. So we hedged against rising fuel prices, basically trying to hold the price of crude of our fuel steady against rising global prices. And then the worst happened. Instead of rising, they took a dip. And it's the same thing with the Forex, as you can presently see. It's very difficult to predict the direction that our foreign exchange is taking. I mean, we started the year at about 100 and something, 120, thereabouts, 130. Now we're at 150, and there's no telling when
the slide will stop.
Yeah, when the slide will stop.
200.
At 200, then we shall start again.
It may change. It may change because a lot of the depreciation of our shilling at the moment is largely driven by the fact that the US has made its treasury bills very attractive, and there's been capital flight. People have been moving dollars away from emerging markets such as ours to the US. So if you look at Africa, basically currencies are sliding downward because it's more attractive now to invest in US treasury. But that has been because US has been trying to contain their inflation.
Their own inflation.
So when they get that right, when they finally contain the inflation, I think the slide will stop. So we may not get to 200. We may not get. But again, that's a conversation that is very difficult to predict.
I hear what you're saying. I still continue to have an issue, especially when we talk about factors that are not peculiar to Kenya. A foreign exchange dip will happen in any country.
Correct.
World phenomena such as COVID happened to the world. Ebola happened to a section of the world, but then everybody else saw the effects of it. So if somebody were to ask about the thing that has been ailing Kenya Airways, we can talk about a contribution of all of these factors. But is there something peculiar to this airline that has caused the problem, aside from the management decisions that probably were not too colorful when it came to the expansion and some of these other things and the hedging, etc., etc.? But is there something else that somebody will be able to look at and say, you know what, this is what has caused the bleed, and this is where we can put a stopper to it? Because if you don't handle that, we can be talking about the same thing for years to come. So has there been an identification truly of what the problem was when you started to see the decline? Because anybody could complain. The other airlines, which for me are on the same place, the other airlines who went through the problems of COVID around the world somehow managed to find a way. Airlines in this region who also felt the hit because of the world phenomena maybe did not go through some of the same problems. So there must be something peculiar, something that has happened or continues to happen that has stopped this light. And that's another question that I had. This light that we're seeing at the end of the tunnel, is it a dim light? Is it flickering? Is it really on that you can go through this tunnel? And
is it red?
This is where we are going. What color is this light? And are we getting there? But what really happened? And has it been possible to put a finger on it and say, all right, this is it, and we can get rid of this thing?
Good question. Let me put it this way. All these issues that we've discussed that precipitated the downward slide of Kenya Airways can be conflated in one simple phrase: legacy debt. Because we put in an inordinate amount of money to fund our expansion, and that expansion did not come to bear. So that left us with a huge debt. I think over $1.2 billion, if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
And debt ordinarily is supposed to fund an expansion that pays for itself. When you have debt that does not fund that kind of expansion that pays itself, it leaves you with a hole. And that hole then carries over year in, year out. So that is the problem of Kenya Airways in one phrase: legacy debt.
Was there mismanagement? And I can go just ahead and ask that question directly, because I'll give you an example. Nigeria Airways, if you ask me what happened to Nigeria, I'll tell you they mismanaged it, they ate the money, and they ate the airline. They ate the airline until everything that was left down to the hangars, we finished it and mismanaged it to the ground completely, and that was the problem.
And the tires are now riding wheelbarrows.
In fact, we even have to ask Ethiopian Airlines to give us a plane, then we paint it green, white, green. I can tell you that's what the problem was. This, you're saying it was a debt issue, and then now trying to catch up?
Yeah. I can tell you for free, I mean, basically from what is already in the public domain, that there was definitely malfeasance on the part of some actors in Kenya Airways.
Okay.
I think about 5 billion shillings was misappropriated. The matter is in court, still active in court. We can't really talk much about it because that would be sub judice. That I can tell you happened. But even then, that was not enough. 5 billion shillings was not enough to sink KQ2 where it is at the moment. I still maintain that it is the debt that did not
wasn't supported by the growth.
That's right. That did not support the growth, and that left us in a hole. And we still have to sort out that debt. Now, to answer your other question about why we are different from other airlines in the region that have also had debt, that have also had Ebola, I would say that other airlines are very well supported by their governments. Okay. Let's talk about COVID, because that's closer home, and most people can relate to that. KQ stopped flying during COVID for about a year, thereabout. Meant no revenues were coming in. It exacerbated the hole that it already was in. But so did other airlines. Other airlines stopped flying as well. Emirates stopped, Qatar stopped, Rwanda Air stopped. Virtually any airline that you can think of around the world came to a standstill.
Yep.
But when these airlines resumed, they had massive support from their governments.
Yes. What does support mean?
Pumping in money, basically. And we're not talking of a few hundred million shillings. We are talking of billions. Take the example of Emirates, because that is touted as one of the models of success around the globe. The Emirati government pumped in 4 billion shillings. Yeah, in a loan. Post-COVID. Yeah, to fund the recovery and to fund their growth. 4 billion shillings.
Okay.
Talk about Qatar. Qatar has, by the way, Qatar had never broken even until 2021. Since inception, government kept pumping in money. It's only in 2021 that they turned an operating profit for the very first time. Talk about Singapore Airlines, because Singapore is also touted as a model of success. The government of Singapore pumped in 19 billion shillings.
Shillings or dollars?
$19 billion to support post-COVID activities and to fund the growth of the airline. You talk about BA had support. You talk about American carriers. United got, I think, about 9 billion shillings in support. Dollars. Yeah, sorry. I'm so used to shillings.
Let's just say that if you say shillings, we know you're saying dollars.
I'm talking about dollars,
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Dollar shillings.
United got about $9 billion worth of support. The entire U.S. industry got 56 billion dollars, sorry, worth of support. So these are the figures that we are talking about. Rwanda, right next door, is funding its aviation growth, and it's spending about $2 billion to fund that growth. Now, KQ has over the years been asking for $3 billion, just $3 billion. And one of the things
that's 300 billion shillings.
Yes. But when you look at it
budget.
When you look at it compared to other airlines around the world that have been touted as models of success, it's a drop in the ocean. It is really. I mean, if you compare one...
How much did Kenya Airways get post-COVID?
Oh, it's gotten, I don't even think it's gotten anything, in terms of shillings, I don't think it has gotten anything close to 160 or 70 billion shillings. Now I'm talking about shillings this time. In dollars, that would be like what? About
100 million.
Yeah.
But let me ask this question. When we say that the debt we had was not supported adequately by output, now those are my words. So we took money to expand the fleet. What did we get wrong? There's a reason why I'm asking this question. in an earlier time, in the time of somebody called Brian Davis,
Yes.
when we went public and we privatized, the story of airlines was very interesting then. Airlines were failing all over the world. Very well-known airlines were failing. Yet, over a period of time, Kenya Airways got to a point where they were actually making very serious money. And it was profitable, and it was a preferred airline. Now, that was an investment. Somehow, things worked, and that airline was working. Now, when we then come to a time when we are spending a lot of money, how should we have spent this money in order for us to recoup our investment before COVID? Because clearly, we did something we shouldn't have done. And so, the backlash is what we're saying brought about this problem. What did we do wrong?
If we had to put a finger on the problem of where we went wrong, our fault as Kenyans, it was in the delay of the delivery of the Dreamliners. Because prior to the Dreamliners, we had the we had the old 777, the aging 777s, and we had the 767s, and we had a couple of 737s as well, and they were aging.
And there were many Embraers.
Yes, but that was before even the Embraers. But that fleet, the fleet that we had then, was operationalized optimally. It served very well, covered all the routes that we needed to cover, and we were making money. But looking ahead, because in aviation you always have to plan ahead, and aviation plans typically take about 10 years. You plan 10 years ahead to renew your fleet and that sort of thing. So looking ahead, we needed to renew our fleet because the planes that we had were old. Take, for instance, the 767s. They did not have the amenities that the modern passenger,
the modern traveler
requires. Like the entertainment was, if you'd ever traveled in them, was just one big screen in the middle of the plane,
playing tape.
That forced you to watch the movie of the day. The plane itself was pretty noisy. The seating wasn't that comfortable. So those are the things that we needed to take into consideration as we planned for the future. Because had we continued with the obsolete equipment, it would have decimated our market, would have lost out to the competition. So that is what necessitated the move to bring more modern planes, the Dreamliners. Unfortunately, where we let go of the old planes, and the Dreamliners took a little long to deliver.
So we had a gap.
We had a gap.
Where we didn't have sufficient fleet.
Yes, we did have sufficient fleet.
Okay.
Then we tried, brings me to the other question, we tried to make up for the gap by bringing in some, I think 3 or 4 777s. But these ones now were different from the earlier 777s. The earlier 777s were Dash 200, 322-seater planes. We brought in a 777-300, which were 400-seater planes. Problem arose because we could never fill those planes. They were way too huge. At any time you travel with a seat that is unsold on a plane, it means you're making a loss.
That's a loss.
It's a loss.
What's the capacity of the Dreamliner?
Dreamliner is about 234, if I'm not wrong. So it's optimal for our networks.
For the kind of network that we have.
Of businesses that the destinations that we need to cover. That's optimal for the footprint.
So what led to getting the 777-300s? Was it that this is what is available in the market and you guys don't have planes anyway, so get these ones?
Yes.
Or was it a decision like, we are a big airline?
Yeah, as I said, there was a delay. We blundered someplace, somewhere. I don't have specific details of exactly what led to the delay because we were meant to have been the launch pad for the 787 on the continent. So there was a delay that lasted about 3 years before we got our delivery of 787.
3-year delay.
Yes.
This guy spares.
So that is what really messed us up. Yeah. If we had to assign a fault to Kenya Airways as an institution, that is what it is.
I want to ask this question. When you talk of a fleet, has Kenya Airways ever had an optimal cargo fleet?
Not quite. And I'll answer it this way because I've talked to a few people in cargo. Cargo is contrary to what people say, yes, cargo can be very profitable, but it can also be a very dicey business because when you take an example of Kenya, for instance, where we export a lot of our tea and coffee, our flowers, our cut flowers, and that sort of thing, that export is one way. We fill the plane, and the plane goes out one way. But what happens when you need to come back the other way, from, say, London, from, say, Pakistan, or from wherever we take our cargo? What happens when you need to come back? You also need to fill the plane for you to optimalize that operation. But we seldom have cargo coming back this way.
What do you mean? We're a net importer.
Yes,
Where does it all come from?
but what do we import, say, from Afghanistan, where we send our tea? Yeah, the plane goes to Afghanistan. But what we bring back from Afghanistan, or from Pakistan, for that matter, there are places where we import from, of course. But those are the places where we don't send our avocados.
Okay,
or our
so
tea.
which airline takes our tea to Afghanistan?
No, we put a lot of tea in the bellies of some of our planes that go, say, to India.
Okay.
Where, we can then be moved on to Pakistan.
Okay.
There are other cargo carriers specifically for cargo, say like Martinair, like DAS, which also move volumes from here. But now the way those cargo planes operate is slightly different from, say, the way Kenya Airways would operate, because these are dedicated freighters. They are hired from wherever they come from, say the US or the Europe, to bring in mining equipment, say for DRC or for other parts of the continent. So
on their way back,
the round trip is already paid up for by the
Right.
people who fund this, who cargo this mining equipment. So them going back is basically, and picking cargo for me is basically surplus for them. Yeah, it's surplus for them.
It's like
It's
those
not
trucks going back to Mombasa and carrying
exactly potatoes and the likes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how it works. That's why their cargo rates are significantly cheaper than anything that Kenya Airways would support profitably.
70 pocket money a pilot.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. 25 minutes to 10, Kenya's biggest conversation. We're discussing the Kenya Airways recovery path. What does it mean? How's it looking like? What does it need? What kind of support does it need? Does it need any? That is why we have Leonard Khafafa. He is an aviation commentator. He's a communication specialist. He's been looking at airlines and studying these things for a while, and he's also looked at the story of Kenya Airways. So we're just sharing. Time for that break.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
About Kenya Airways, the recovery, also comparing it with other airlines across the globe and how they've been performing. So you've talked about, a combination of many factors that led the airline to where it went to. Right? Some of those things were completely beyond the management's control. Some things you could look back and see this was management decision making. But is there a possibility of another stakeholder also playing a role in this? Staff themselves?
Let me get it.
Stakeholders like airline pilots going on strike, pilots demanding strike, pilots demanding higher pay at a time, cabin crew, engineers. Is there anything that we could say, all right, because of the actions of these critical sectors of staff or cadres of staff, they also are coming in and adding into the perfect storm?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that obviously industrial action is detrimental to the running of an enterprise, any enterprise, particularly when that industrial action is drawn out, and particularly when resolution does not seem to be in sight anywhere. And we saw that happen last year when pilots went on strike for 3 days. There were no services from KQ, and we kept losing, I think, something to the tune of about 300 million shillings every day. Obviously, that is detrimental to the running of the airline. But no, in the sense that whereas, yes, there's been industrial action in the past, it's not so detrimental as to sink KQ into the kind of hole that it has found itself in the past. And that industrial action, just like last year's, has always been managed. They've always come to a compromise of sorts, and work has always moved on. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to that light at the end of the tunnel, because something must inform that.
Yeah.
And looking at the numbers that we saw this year, it seems to put a glimmer of hope in the minds of a lot of people.
Correct.
And I'm sure the continent needs the success story of more than just one or two when it comes to airlines. We've seen South Africa go. We saw years ago where fleets in West Africa went down. What is the hope? What informs this that, okay, things are on the up and up?
Well, for like we've said, for the first time in 6 years, we've turned an operating profit, which shows that the business is viable. It's not a net profit. And we cannot turn a net profit until the legacy debt issue is resolved. As long as that is the elephant in the room. As long as you have the legacy debt, however you
much operating profit you make,
whatever operating profit you make, whatever operating efficiency you imbue in the airline, you will always make a net loss. But you still make a net profit, basically showing that whatever you put in, whatever you're using to sustain the airline in terms of employee salaries and that sort of thing, enables you to still have some money left over at the end of the day. You meet your expenses, your operating expenses. That is a good thing. So taking care of legacy debt is just the only thing now. That's why I say this light at the end of the tunnel. The management of KQ got into a project called Project Kifaru about 3 years ago, because at the time then, there was no hope, there was no glimmer of light whatsoever in terms of operating profit, and by extension, nothing in terms of net profitability. But after the workings of Project Kifaru, we now see that we've turned an operating profit, and there are different metrics that show you that indeed KQ is turning around. You look at the load factors on the plane.
What's that?
Yeah, load factors basically the number of people that are traveling on KQ, the number of passengers that you have on a plane, how the capacity that you have, over a given period of time. Yeah, so we have very favorable load factors. I think we are nearing the global average, in terms of what is acceptable. You look at the available seat kilometers, which is basically technical jargon for the capacity that has been deployed. Post-COVID, airlines began to open up gradually. Planes began to fly, limited capacity on limited routes. Now you have KQ basically getting back to its pre-COVID capacity. We have planes now up in the air, virtually all the planes, and we have more capacity. We are covering more destinations now than we were previously. So those are things that show you that KQ is turning around.
It's turning around.
Yeah, when you look at the revenues now that KQ is getting, I think there's an uplift of about 56 billion shillings, in terms of revenue. 56% rather of what was last year for the same period this year. That's something. The number of passengers, I think 2.1 million for the half year, compared to about 1.8 million shillings for the same period last year, shows you that things are happening. Something is happening.
I have to ask this question, though. There are those who say that the composition of a board is also very crucial to the running of a business. KQ board at the time of the Mawingu project and the borrowing, what role did they play in this fiasco that we keep referring to as legacy debt? Because that was the summation of it. And then when we look at the current board that we have, can they take credit for what is happening as we see as a turnaround? That's question number one. Question number two, there's a time back when there was some $1 billion or so that was supposed to have been borrowed from some Exim bank for buying new aircrafts and engines. If indeed that loan was taken, and if indeed those aeroplanes were bought, and if indeed the engines were actually bought, where are they?
Okay, to answer your question, the first question to do with the board, yes, I mean, the composition of our board is good. I mean, as in, you need to have talent. The board needs to have talent that cuts across different sectors of the aviation industry, or management, basically. And yes, in the past, we had excellent boards that made great decisions that got KQ flying. Of course, there were issues, but subsequently, we had board members from KLM, which was a partner of KQ at the time, and who came and they had veto power. vetoed some of the decisions that would have benefited KQ and ensured that lucrative routes that KQ had then were assigned to the KLM Air France side of the equation. Yes. So to that end, we had competent people on the board, but the decisions that they made were not in the interests of Kenya Airways. They were self-serving interests. Currently, yes, we have a great board. The function of a board is basically to set strategy, to give direction. The board is not involved in the day-to-day running of the company. That you leave to management. So we have a great board. It has a great strategy. Kifaru is part of the strategy. And we have a great management team in place that is executing that strategy. Seen in the fact that KQ is turning around. KQ is now looking at operational profitability. Yeah. And once a way has been found to retire the legacy debt, then KQ will return to net profitability.
Leonard, last week we hosted a pilot.
Yeah.
And he was talking about those two factors, the composition of the board. And you're saying, as pilots, many of them sit and say, an airline such as ours should have certain competencies at the board level. So people who understand the operations of an airline, those who understand the context of Kenya Airways. And he was arguing, we need to have a pilot on the board, a retired pilot. We have many who have served Kenya Airways for long in other areas. Maybe we need to have an engineer on the board. Then other stakeholders. Kenya Airways is making a lot of money from, for example, export of all these flowers and cut flowers and all. Why don't we have some of these private sector players who are representing specific interests sitting on the board? So the decisions that are being made are also informed by what the market needs. What do you say to that?
If say, a pilot who sat on the board figured a way out to retire the legacy debt, then I would say, by all means, have a pilot on board. But a pilot is, with all due respect, a glorified driver. With all due respect.
Mr. Khafafa, you're being unfair.
With all due respect. Why? Because his job is to move equipment from one point to the other.
Yes.
He doesn't know anything to do with finance.
He would not. He or she would not
He's a
have a
pilot.
vested
Okay.
stake.
Let me look at it. Let me look at this. Let me look at it this way.
Go on.
Let me look at it this way. I have a SACCO. I'm the head of a Matatu SACCO.
Yes.
Maybe I have like about 100 Matatus.
Fleet of 100.
Fleet of 100.
Yeah.
I need financing to expand my fleet to say 200 Matatus.
One expertise that you need.
So, of course, now I will go to my drivers or my head driver, or my manager, and ask him to recommend the kind of matatu that I will need, to serve my needs. But I will not look at him to guide me on procuring finances. From
Why
the board,
not?
From the bank.
If you have a table that has 7 seats, all right? So you'll have one person who understands finance and management.
Correct.
But also it's important that they have some context of finance and management in the transport sector.
Yeah.
Not somebody who has finance of farming coming to do finance. So, right? Would you also say that let me also have somebody who has actually plied these routes, who knows the routes, who knows when you talk about if the strategy is let's change this, he runs this particular...
And has sufficient interaction with other players in other parts of the world.
Yes.
That's why you need a board, a professional board in terms of whatever they do, and that's why you need managers. Now, from the management side is when you draw the expertise that you're looking for, which KQ has. I mean, look at the managers they have. They have an operations director. He's part of the management team. He does not sit on the board, but he's part of the management team. He's a pilot with 17,000 hours, flying hours experience. That's a very experienced guy.
But can you imagine...
Most of the guys in KQ have, say, about 7,000 flying hours.
Can you imagine this very experienced pilot being made to implement a strategy that has been made by a matatu driver?
Or someone who's on the board and they are a banker because they've lent Kenya Airways money, or someone who's on the board and the chairman of some commodity that is exported. So
you need to look at the problem that KQ faces, and you need to structure your board accordingly. The problem with KQ right now is not operations. If it was operations, like I'm saying, then you'd need a pilot on board to handle the problem.
Clearly,
the problem
it has been operations for a while.
The problem.
That's why they are turning an operating profit for the first time in very many years.
The problem is finance. And the reason why they had problems with operations is because they had debt. You operate, but the revenues that you get are not enough to service the debt. That is why they have people who have experience in structuring finance, the financial aspects of the airline. Yeah, that's why you have experienced negotiators now who will go to the lessors and talk to them and say, look, this is the contract that we have, and this is what we propose that you do so that we are able to service that contract. So it's a win-win for everyone. I can guarantee you,
Mr. Khafafa,
unless a pilot has gone to business school, he will not have that expertise.
Mr.
Sitting on the
Khafafa,
board.
Sitting on the board.
Yeah, but
I can guarantee you that.
But you're assuming that just because someone is a pilot, they don't have any other expertise except that of flying the plane. Surely is that assumption a fair assumption?
No. I mean, when they have other aspects of expertise,
Yes.
then they are put in the management team. I have just given an example.
But you're limiting.
I've
it.
given you an example of the current director of operations, who was headhunted for the unique skill set that he brings.
You see,
yeah, and he's turning around the operations
Mr.
of the
Khafafa,
company.
boards
So
are supposed to
he's
be
useful.
representative.
He's useful at that
Yes.
point. Yeah.
Look, I'm looking at an organization like, say, NSSF, and I'm looking at how that board, people who head unions end up in that board of NSSF. You know why? Because it's people who contribute to that
Representing a critical stakeholder.
board. Exactly. Now, how then do you leave pilots? They're a critical stakeholder, if you ask me. I don't know even how to look at it.
Their voice is represented
By?
already by the fact that they're in the management team. That is where we need them. Let me look at it this way.
Flip it.
When you look at the board of KQ as
Yeah.
currently composed,
Yeah.
where do you see any issue? Do you find any issues with the board of KQ as currently
Yeah,
composed?
there's lack
Yeah.
of piloting expertise.
No, what will piloting expertise do to the board? How will it retire the legacy debt? Because that is the problem.
No.
The problem is the legacy debt.
That is that is the major problem. It's a main problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As you now start thinking about what else, how else do we make this thing lean? How else do we make this thing work better? So you'll have all these other expertise, you'll have financial expertise coming in. What's wrong with having one of those, an engineer, a pilot, sitting on the board as well? And this is somebody who's coming, maybe the same way you're saying, the current operations director, about that person actually sitting on the board and giving that experience and saying, guys, I have been up in the air for many years. I have talked to very many pilots. I've studied many airlines. They're also, remember, when they were a small boy, just like Leonard Khafafa,
Yeah.
they wanted to be up in the air.
Yeah.
They're enthusiasts.
Yeah.
How
They
I look
ended
at
up
it,
they
yeah.
ended up working in this as pilot, but they are enthusiasts. The same way you are an enthusiast, yet you're a communications person.
And maybe learning to what you had mentioned before.
let me say, before you go any further, there's an American expression to the effect that if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It's broke.
It's not broken.
This one is broken.
It's not broken. It's working. It was broken in the past. It was fixed by the current board and management team.
Okay.
That is why we are turning an operating profit. It was broken in the past. No doubt about it. Between 2013 and say 2019, when the current board and management team came into place, it was broken.
Can I ask?
Now it is working. Why are we trying to refix something that isn't broken?
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
One of the things that you had said previously was that there could have been a decision that was made about expansion that perhaps was I can't remember the word that you used, but it was a management faux pas
Yeah.
in terms of the buying of new airline or equipment, right?
Yeah.
Would you see a situation like that whereby maybe somebody who sat in an advisory role would be able to say, no, guys, we've been up in the air for the last 10 years. We had interaction generally across the world, and maybe this would be the way in which you go, because it was one of the mistakes, but it was a major mistake in terms of purchase. Would you see something like that as a role
yeah.
that somebody sitting on the board who has that experience, for example, would then
lend.
be able to lend?
I will say this with reference, apropos to what you're saying. The decisions that were made to purchase the 787 Dreamliners, those were excellent decisions. They were the right decisions. There was no issue with that decision. I now venture into the realm of speculation. The problem arose in the delays that happened with the delays that came about
with the delivery of
with
the
the
same.
delivery of the 787. And this is where speculation comes in. It is said that there was political interference because there were people who didn't want KQ to get those Boeing aircraft. They wanted a
lease.
competitor. They wanted a competitor to bring in a different type of equipment. So there was a lot of political interference that delayed the decisional process. So the decision was right
Because there were
the board was
political
right.
appointees at the
but
board.
those are but those are now factors beyond the board, you know, because for a decision like that,
shareholding and all.
shareholding, government has to come in. Government has to come in to give certain guarantees. If government stalls, in
Then-
terms of giving those guarantees, it is not a reflection
Everything is up in
of
the
the
air.
competence of the board. It's not a reflection of the soundness of the decision that has been made.
Leonard, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a short 1 hour, hasn't it?
It has been extremely short. Just getting started.
Leonard Khafafa is an aviation commentator. He's a communication specialist. He's been our guest this morning. We've been talking about Kenya Airways, the recovery path. Yes, Kenya Airways has announced and returned for the first time in 6 years an operating profit. But it's still making losses because of the legacy debt. Also because of currency fluctuation and other factors that are beyond the management and board's control. Thank you for sharing your insights.
You're very welcome.
Karibu
And thank you
tena.
for having me. Asante sana.
Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation. As always, have a lovely day. See you again tomorrow, Thursday. It's 10 a.m.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.